Welcome to Rooted and Real, a podcast centered around all topics in the behavioral health space. From mental health to addiction and everything in between, hosts Margot and Ashley take a deeper look at topics impacting us every day. The show is for anyone and everyone with a passion and a desire to be better, understand, and grow. Join us as we get rooted and real. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Rooted and Real. My name's Margot Hyde, Chief Communications Officer here at the Root Center for Advanced Recovery. Ashley Hickey not joining us today, but that's okay. We've got two wonderful guests, Chris Freemuth, Acting Director of External Affairs at New Haven Pride Center, and Sully Hart, a volunteer for the New Haven Pride Center and also a licensed master social worker. We know Pride Month is over, but of course we want to keep this conversation going well past June. So gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Chris, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the New Haven Pride Center, what it does, who you guys are, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Well, I am the Pride Center's located at 50 Orange Street in downtown New Haven. So that's right on the corner of Orange and Crown. We're a nonprofit that serves the LGBTQIA plus community in New Haven and throughout Connecticut. So everybody's welcome. I've been saying we're a queer house for all people. So what that means to me is we are run and we focus on queer people, but everybody's invited to the party. So that's our statement. We provide a lot of services for the queer community in New Haven. We have affinity groups, we have community programs, professional development programs, service programs, and we connect to the larger movement throughout the state and the country. So we're trying to help those who need the most help in terms of physical and social and mental health resources. And we also just want to be a community center where people can come hang out and have activities and just kind of feel free to be themselves.
Well, we here at the Root Center are also a nonprofit, so we believe in nonprofits supporting other nonprofits. So together we're stronger. How was Pride for you guys? And, what did you guys notice this year? Anything different? Any changes?
Well, I have sort of an unexpected answer to that. So the Pride Center in New Haven was in some financial trouble for the last couple of years due to some prior mismanagement. And so this February, we actually closed. And then we reopened. We had this massive fundraising campaign in March and April. And through the successes of that, we were able to reopen. And then we had another local fundraising campaign, and that was also super successful. So because we closed in February, we had to furlough our staff and close the doors. We still have the space, but we closed the doors for a while. And so since these fundraising campaigns, we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I was on the board before I was hired as interim director. And so for the last few months, we've been doing a lot of work to restructure the board, restructure our finances, go through our programming and operations, and hire myself. And we're in the process of hiring another interim director. So that is a roundabout way of saying for Pride Month, we didn't do a ton publicly because we did do a ton, but it was all behind the scenes. So we didn't do a ton of celebration publicly. However, on June 1st, to celebrate the start of Pride Month and the successes of us coming back to life with these fundraising campaigns, we had a big press event. The governor came, the mayor of New Haven, the lieutenant governor, state treasurer Eric Russell, Rosa DeLauro. So we had a big celebration just on that day on June 1st. And then spent most of Pride Month behind the scenes working on all of the stuff I just mentioned. And then we finished Pride Month by having a health and wellness event at the Pride Center, handing out shoes and socks and hygiene products for those who were in need. So kind of a funky Pride Month, to be perfectly honest, for the Pride Center as we get back on our feet.
So that kind of coincides perfectly with my next question is that, the purpose of this podcast, I wanted to keep the conversation going past the month of June. So obviously Pride is important, not just in the month of June, but all year round. So what does the New Haven Pride Center do to make sure that that spirit's kept alive on a yearly basis?
Yeah, so we have programming all year. We have multiple programs a week at the Pride Center, and we try to advertise that as much as we can so people know they are always welcome. And whether or not we have programming, we just have once we're up and running, we just have the doors open so people can come and hang out. But absolutely, you're right. The Pride Month is important because it boosts awareness and celebration for the community, but it's supposed to boost it above normal levels, and the normal levels should already be people should already be interested and involved in this in the queer community and protecting our rights and celebrating our lives every day of the year.
For sure. And Sully, I want to bring you into the conversation now. Just doing some research, I think there's some really staggering statistics that are worth noting as we talk about why it's so important to keep this conversation going. Specifically, us being a mental health and substance use facility, there are so many statistics surrounding LGBTQ plus communities and how they're impacted when it comes to mental health. The Trevor Project, which is a leading suicide prevention and crisis intervention nonprofit organization for LGBTQ plus young people. They put out some statistics on a survey of roughly, I believe it was 18,000 plus people, stating that 39% of LGBTQ plus young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year, including 46% of transgender and non-binary young people. LGBTQ plus youth of color also reported higher rates than white peers. When you hear that statistic, Sully, what does that make you think?
Yeah, thank you. When I hear that statistic, I think about concerning behaviors like suicidal ideation or suicide attempts or substance overuse, substance overdependence, and think of what those concerning behaviors indicate, which so often for so many people, especially in the LGBTQ plus community, are feelings of intense loneliness, feelings of hopelessness, feelings that they don't matter, that there's not a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think movements like Pride or the effort to Pride centers are so important because they complicate that story a little bit. They say, no, you do matter, that you're not alone, that there are many other people walking in your shoes or who have walked in similar paths to yours. And they provide kind of an alternative narrative for people who don't think that they matter, who don't think that they're safe to be who they want to be. Um, and that's part of why it's also important to continue this conversation well past June, too. In June, there are intentional efforts all over the world to create community and to bring people together over, issues that they have in common or over a community that they share. Um, and it's so important to keep that sense of community and that sense of connection going, much further. You brought up suicide rates in LGBTQ plus youth or suicide attempt rates. And so often a moment of crisis that can lead someone to attempt suicide is a matter of minutes or hours. And so it can make a huge world of difference, a life or death difference for someone to feel that they have a person or a community to reach out to when they're in a moment of crisis, because sometimes 5 minutes on the phone is all it takes to, you know, to talk them off a ledge per se.
Yeah, no, and of course, worth mentioning that 988 always a resource that people can use at any time of day, 24/7. You can call and text. Another statistic that stuck out to me was that 50% of LGBTQ plus young people who wanted to get mental health care in the past year were not able to get it. And this is also Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So I think it's really prominent to bring that up. And just kind of for me, it's shocking, as someone who works for the Root Center, and we're very inclusive and making it known that we accept anyone and everyone, no matter your background, where you stand, who you are. But 50% of young people saying that they wanted mental health care and then were not able to get it. You yourself being a mental health care provider, how do you respond to that?
I think it's tragic, and it's also impossible to talk about this without acknowledging the time that we're having this conversation in, with massive cuts to Medicaid, that for some people is the only way they could afford mental health care in the system that we're in. And so a huge part of this conversation is also advocacy and keeping pressure on politicians and people in government to keep thinking about access to mental health care for folks in the LGBTQ plus community. It's so sad that that is a reality that people are living in. Like I said, feelings of connection, feelings of being seen, being valued, being understood are so important for so many people in the LGBTQ plus community. And sometimes if people feel unable to express themselves to their family or in their neighborhoods, a clinical person who is bound by confidentiality and who's also bound, you know, by oath and values to look after this person can be the only person who they have to share their experience with. It could be the only person who might recognize some concerning signs or some warning signs for, an impending mental health crisis. So the fact that 50% of LGBTQ plus youth who are interested in looking for mental health care can access it is a huge way that our system is letting down this population.
And, you mentioned earlier, the changes that we've kind of seen on a political standpoint. And we're very fortunate here in Connecticut that we live in a state that's very open and accepting. LGBTQ plus young people, it's worth noting, who reported living in a very accepting community, attempted suicide at a less than half the rate of those who reported living in unaccepting communities. So I think this question's kind of for both of you guys. Sully being a provider in a state that is very open and accepting, and Chris, working for an advocacy group that is in a state that is more progressive than maybe some others. How does that maybe, make you guys feel, knowing that you're on the forefront of the change? You guys are leaders when it comes to making sure that folks know that they're accepted no matter what. And here in Connecticut, we know that's the case, but unfortunately, we know it's not the case across other states.
Well, I'd say two things to that. First is that there's the sort of macro and micro scales. So macro in Connecticut, we're doing pretty well. But if you zoom into the actual communities in Connecticut, New Haven has a lot of poverty. Everywhere in the world has its own issues. So maybe we're doing well in the aggregate, but the New Haven Pride Center has a lot of work to do in New Haven for the people in and of New Haven. So I would say we still have a lot of work to do on the ground here. And then, but to recognize that the larger context within the state of Connecticut is pretty positive, then our role as a leader nationally is, of course, anybody who's doing well has an obligation to help out anyone who's not doing so well. So our job is to be a model for others and also a support and a resource so as the New Haven Pride Center sort of comes back and is enjoying this renaissance, what we're doing is plugging into the national network. There's an organization called Centerlink, which is a national network of LGBTQ organizations. So plugging into that group and learning from them, learning from LGBTQ organizations throughout the country, and also offering them insights from our experience.
Mm-hmm.
Sully, do you have anything to add to that?
I do. Yeah, I think, on one hand, obviously, it's encouraging and it's grateful to be in a place like Connecticut that, as Chris said, on the aggregate, is doing its best to be accepting and affirming. But I think it's also an invitation for us to think of the ways that maybe we could keep growing on that front. So many of the statistics, for instance, you've mentioned the Trevor Project, which is such a good organization. So many of their statistics just spike if you zoom in on, Black and brown individuals, or if you zoom in on trans and non-binary individuals. So I think it's, when that is the case, it's a good invitation to consider the ways, okay, yes, we're trying to be, affirming, but where are the ways that maybe different identities sometimes go overlooked or are swept under the rug, and how can we truly make an effort to be affirming to all, especially when every single person is really a web of many different identities, which identities are being overlooked or neglected.
Yeah, and that's, as I mentioned, it being Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, something that we certainly should keep at the forefront of our mind. And Sully, you kind of mentioned it earlier, where the risk of substance use can kind of play into this if we're not careful. NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, reported that LGBTQ plus adults are nearly twice as likely as heterosexual adults to experience a substance use disorder. Transgender individuals are almost 4 times as likely as cisgender individuals to experience a substance use disorder. And illicit drug use is significantly higher in high school age youth who identify as LGBTQ plus or are unsure of their identity compared to their heterosexual peers. When you hear that, how do you kind of come at that as a provider to try to make a difference in that, when obviously we know so much more work has to be done?
Yeah, thank you. As a provider, I'm thinking about so many of the social and environmental factors that are contributing to a person's mental health. When we're thinking about a person's mental health, we're not only thinking about biological factors like genetics, even though that's a part of it, we're also thinking of psychological factors like a belief system, self-esteem, and we're thinking of environmental factors, which for people in the LGBTQ plus community, especially depending on, where they are and other identities that come into play, those things can be really fraught. So we're thinking about, does this person feel safe at work or at school or at home? Does this person feel like they can be who they want to be, who they feel they were born to be? Do they have access to all of their basic needs? Because, all of the coping skills in the world, all of the psychoeducation in the world can only do so much if somebody is in an actively hostile or actively, uncomfortable or unsafe environment. So it's obviously thinking of ways to help people, regulate their own emotions, but also thinking of ways to help people at the environmental level too. To give them a solid ground on which to build.
And Chris, you mentioned having to deal with certain populations and issues in the New Haven area. We know there's a large population of folks who are unhoused, but we also know that there's a lot of folks who struggle from substance use disorder. Is this something that also the New Haven Pride Center is seeing and combating as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I was just going to say, I mean, I've experienced this in my own life, and I know that this is a very common thing for LGBTQ folks, but as young people, many of us spend a lot of our younger lives living in lies and shame and fear and secrecy until finally, hopefully, we're able to accept ourselves and then come out and be accepted by those around us. And that process is different for everyone and can be incredibly difficult. But lies, shame, fear, secrecy, those are some of the underlying factors for substance abuse and for a lot of these mental health issues that we're talking about. So it's certainly no surprise that a group of people who is often sort of shoved in a closet, as we say, with all of these lies and shame and secrecy, would have these risk factors for mental health and substance abuse issues. For the Pride Center, so as we reopen, we're planning to host 12-step meetings in the space, and we're just sensitive, generally speaking, to mental health and substance abuse.
I wanted to also make sure that I give you guys both the opportunity to say, are there any questions that I'm not asking? Like, how can I be better aware, better informed, and just things that you wish other people knew when it came to the LGBTQ plus community and how we be better allies moving forward?
Yeah, I'm often thinking about this, how to be a better ally, because of course, all of us can be better allies to whatever disadvantaged groups we're not part of. I'd say, of course, always educate oneself. And one can always donate to the New Haven Pride Center. That's a great way to be an ally. You can go onto our website. I would be remiss if I didn't offer that. But I would say, so one thing I want to bring to the Pride Center is just the power of hanging out, the power of just being together. And so as an ally, if you have queer friends, if you have trans friends, if you have lesbian or gay friends, just get to know them, hang out, and enjoy time together. Not everything needs to be terribly serious or clinical or rooted in programming and services and all of that. There's also the incredible power of just smiling at someone, saying hello, and having a little conversation, just treating people like people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to go off of what Chris just said, the power of hanging out, I think is how you phrased it. That sense of connection is so very important when people are in recovery for mental health conditions or for substance use conditions. Feeling that they are not alone, that they have social supports can make such a huge difference in their own journey. I think many people also, when we're talking about mental health in certain communities, many people feel a little bit unsure about what to do if they are not themselves trained mental health clinicians. And there's so many different forms that social support can take. Emotional support can simply look like leading with curiosity, asking somebody else about their experience instead of going with assumptions that you have. There can be informational support. So if you know of a really great resource for folks who are struggling with financial insecurity, or if you know of a place of worship that is really affirming to LGBTQ plus folks, providing that information to somebody is itself a form of support. So there are so many different ways that you can bolster and, elevate someone's mental health without being, a trained clinician.
Is there anything that you think that I haven't asked that's worth noting?
Good question.
I think it'd be great to know, Chris, you talked about uh, kind of this year for the Pride Center as a year of rebuilding. What do you hope to see in the future?
What do I hope to see in the future for the Pride Center?
Yeah.
Oh God, how much time do we have? Um, I hope to see a place. I hope for the Pride Center to be a place that is like a holistic space for queer people. So a place where people can come for services, for information, for education, and for connection, as well as for advocacy and organizing at the political level. So if somebody has a need for engagement, whether that's, as I just said, like to advocate for their rights on the political level, local, state, or federal, or if they just want to hang out and play cards with a stranger, or if they need socks and shoes, or whatever the service is, I want them to be able to either find it at the Pride Center or be able to find a referral network at the Pride Center that they can easily access and find it at one of our community partner institutions.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, Chris and Sully. I think community is ultimately the theme here that we discussed today, community coming together and being stronger together. So I thank you both for your time. I'll be sure to link details to the New Haven Pride Center in the caption details. But thank you so much for being on Rooted and Real today.
Thanks, Margo.
Thank you.
We appreciate you tuning in to another episode of Rooted and Real. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. As always, stay connected with us on social media to find out about new episodes and keep the conversation going. What should we talk about next? We want to hear from you. Until next time, remember to keep it rooted and real.